Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our session will begin shortly, but before we get started, I'd like to run through some quick housekeeping tips. Please note that this session is being recorded and we'll be sending you the recording by email early next week. Today's session will run for 1 hour, with the last portion being dedicated to a Q&A with our expert speakers. Everyone is currently in listen-only mode, but we'd love to keep this session interactive, so we encourage you to use the chat and the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen. The chat function is for you to share your thoughts and answers to our questions. Simply click the chat button and you'll see a blue drop-down menu that says to panelists. Please make sure to change that to panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your message. Please submit your questions for the speakers through the Q&A box. If you submit your question in the chat box, we might miss it. Towards the end of the session, the speakers will answer the most popular questions submitted. So make sure to vote for your favorite questions by clicking the thumbs up box in the Q&A box. We're ready to begin. Over to you, Walter.
Well, thanks, Adam, for the introduction. I'm certainly very excited to be here today. Welcome to Muse's Consciousness Conversations. This is the third session in our Brain Health series, and I'm excited to be here and particularly excited about our amazing speakers today. My name is Walter Greenleaf. I'm a neuroscientist and digital health expert working at Stanford University. I also serve as a chief science officer here at Interaxon Muse. I'll be the host today. I've been working in digital health issues involving cognitive aging ever since I was a graduate student at Stanford, and I've maintained a lifelong interest focused on this very important topic of how do our brains change as we mature in age, and also what are the possible interventions and support systems we can do to promote healthy aging. I was served at one point as the director of the Mind Division for the Stanford Center on Longevity, and I've also had the pleasure of working with a number of digital health companies. I feel that the best way for us to deal with the onrushing issue of an aging population with smaller family sizes and less informal caregivers is to leverage technology. So I'm particularly glad to be here with you today to talk about this important issue. At Muse, we work with a remarkable network of research scientists, meditation teachers, clinicians to come up with products to help you with issues involving health and wellness. With this series on conscious conversations, we want to bring the cutting edge knowledge to you to help you make actionable changes related to brain health. Today, we'll be chatting about aging and how that influences brain health. For those of you who are new to Muse, we develop state-of-the-art assessments and interventions using EEG technology. Our goal is to help individuals to live happier, longer lives, more connected lives, and with human-focused technology. Our meditation sleep tracking headbands and our apps provide information and insights to help you refocus during the day and refresh overnight. And we'll be providing more information about that. In the meantime, I want to start off our session here by bringing in two of the leaders in the field of aging brain health. Welcome to Dr. Allison Sekuler and Stephen White. Thank you for being here. I'd love you to introduce yourselves and tell us about the work that you're doing. Please let us know not only what is the problem you're trying to solve, but also what drives your passion? What motivates you to work so hard to solve that problem? Allison, perhaps you could start us off.
Sure, happy to be here, and it's great to see you again, Walter. Hope to see you again in person sometime soon.
Absolutely.
And Stephen, great to be here with you as well. My background is in psychology, cognitive neuroscience. I did an undergraduate in mathematics and psychology at Pomona College, and then did my PhD in psychology at University of California at Berkeley. And that was right in the beginning days of what is now called cognitive neuroscience, which is where we try to figure out how does the brain work without cutting open the head, using techniques like EEG or fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, as well as modeling and looking at what happens when people have different kinds of brain damage and so on and so forth, and also just doing basic behavioral work to try to infer what's happening in the brain. So I've just been very much interested in what makes people tick my whole life. My dad actually is a neuroscientist also. And so I grew up in a family where we were always asking questions about what makes people think the way that they do and so on and so forth. And although I'm in my 50s, I'm actually a digital native because my dad, as a professor back since, the 60s, we had a teletype in his home office when I was growing up. So I've been, programming since I was, 8 or 10 or something. So I've been always just fascinated by technology. And then, as many people on this call will also have, I had a number of relatives who suffered from or lived with dementia. Both of my grandmothers passed away from Alzheimer's in the end, one in her 70s and one at the age of 96. And so as I started doing more and more work and understanding, how the brain works and how I was particularly interested in how vision science and how we see the world around us, I started to think more about whether there was something that we could do that would take the work beyond just publishing in like Nature and Science and those sorts of journals and bringing that work into the real world. And so the work that I'm doing right now is really trying to combine my love for the technology with my desire to help people live longer, live better, and live more. So I run the Rotman Research Institute in Canada, which is the world's premier aging and one of the world's premier aging and cognitive neuroscience research institutes. I also run the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. So I see a lot of technologies that are already out there. And I've been doing work with Muse for quite a number of years. And I've just been fascinated by the fact that they could take this technology that normally we have in the lab that's a $250,000 piece of equipment and shrink it down into something that you can just wear like right on your head and get, research ready measurements, as well as using it for other kinds of things and really democratizing science. So those are the sorts of things that we're doing. So we're using Muse in a whole bunch of different ways in the lab. One is measuring it in the field, so we can get EEG measurements in the field. And I think that that's something else I'm really passionate about, is giving people power over their own health data and the power to track what's going on in their lives and to make sure that they're empowered to be able to live their best possible lives. And I think that using these kinds of approaches, we can do that. We also want to see what we can do to detect dementia as early as possible. So we're working on a number of different biomarkers. And then we're also doing things to try to see whether people, for example, who already have dementia and advanced Alzheimer's, they might not be able to communicate, but they still need to interact with people. And so we want to see how we can use these sorts of technologies, whether it's Muse or something else, to be able to really read people's minds and see what is it that they can see, what can they hear, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, so that they can live their best possible lives as well. So that's what makes me tick, and that's the kind of work that we're doing.
Fantastic. Allison, it is great to see you, and I'm always so excited to hear about the work you're doing. And I know during our conversation, we'll go a little deeper and we'll have a chance to hear some of your ideas about how some of our listeners can also get involved in supporting research into this issue by perhaps being participants in some citizen science type work. Stephen, I'd love to hear same questions. Tell us, please, a little bit about what are the problems you're trying to solve, where and how are you doing it, and what's your passion? What's driving you here?
Yeah, thank you. A pleasure to be here, and I come through this through a slightly different path. So I'm an accountant and a lawyer by trade, so obviously I'm a perfect fit for this neuroscience discussion. But to be truthful, I spent the last 15 years after my professional career working in the healthcare industry, developing novel, innovative healthcare hardware and software. And we were focused on creating better access and more affordable access for cancer treatment and cancer patients. And what I learned over time is that brain health is the next big thing we need to address. We did a great job with heart health, dating back to the Framingham study, which is still ongoing. I think it started in the 40s. And look at what it taught us about heart health. And we've essentially doubled our physical lives. We've ignored our brains for too long until there's a problem. And today, on average, we will outlive our peak brain health years by 20 years. Now, raise your hand if you want that. I remember taking my mom to a dementia care facility when she developed Alzheimer's. My cousin, Mary Rose Taylor, you may know of her as one of the premier anchors on CBS and at the Atlanta market. She just passed away from ALS. So it's near and dear to my heart. And the epiphany for me, Walter, was when I learned about neuroplasticity. And that's a mouthful, it's a big word, but it is truly powerful when you understand, you, Walter, you, Allison, you in the audience, you can be the architect of your own brain and your own brain health. That sounds a bit aspirational. It sounds like a unicorn, but it's actually true. When you think about neuroplasticity, it was discovered when people were trying to damage brains, mice brains, as they're doing research. And guess what? These brains were rewiring themselves. And people kind of had an aha moment and said, oh my gosh, the brain is this mystery box, but wow, it can heal. And some of our recent research shows us that your brain remains very plastic even into older age. Some of our recent research, we thought we'd see a big difference between 20-somethings and 60-somethings in terms of how influence, the kind of influence cognitive training can bring to your brain. And actually that has not been the case. So we're very, very encouraged. It's never too late to start, nor is it never too early to start taking care of your brain. So I'm here, as our leader, Dr. Chapman, would say, here at the Center for Brain Health. We're part of the University of Texas at Dallas, and we are the Center for Brain Health when it comes to thinking about how to keep healthy brains healthier longer. Make no mistake, we're in a brain health crisis because we've abused our brains for too long, and we're trying to help all 7.8 billion people take better care of their brains. So that's why I do this.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I've had the opportunity to visit the Center for Brain Health, and what I love is the fact that there is not only a fantastic focus on basic research and neuroscience of brain function, et cetera, but there's also, and I believe you have a whole building dedicated to this also, a focus on translating that out into actionable interventions that can help us as we move forward. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. But to really get our discussion going, and please, audience, be part of this by letting us know your questions and your observations. Let me ask Stephen and Allison, what do you mean by brain health? And you know, obviously it's important, but perhaps just go into detail from your perspective. What is brain health?
Allison, do you want to go first, and then I'll back clean up?
Sure, happy to start. So when we're talking about brain health, we're talking about what people can do to make sure that they can use their brains to their greatest possibility for who they are. I think that's really important. It's not that there is an optimal level of brain health. It's that the brain health is really relative to the person. So when I think about older people aging, for example, I often start my public lectures talking about real world senior superheroes, right? And so one of those is a fellow who jumped out of an airplane when he was 103 years old. And another, you know, is one of my all-time favorites. She's a bodybuilder when she was, you know, a world champion bodybuilder in her 80s. But I also show a picture of a woman who is confined to a wheelchair. She's not able to walk, but she was Baycrest's first valedictorian in the later life learning school that we had set up. And in each of those cases, people were doing the most that they possibly could with their lives to live their best possible lives. And it's a very personal sort of idea about what is your best possible life. So when we're thinking about brain health, that's what we're thinking about. And what goes into it is not just one thing. What goes into it, and I think we're going to talk about all of these different elements, is making sure that you've got the right diet, making sure that you've got the right exercise regimen, making sure you're challenging your brain, you're attending seminars like this, whether in person or virtually, and you're learning new things and you're trying new things, social interaction, mindfulness, stress reduction, all of these different kinds of things feed into it. But again, how they come together and how they interact is, again, really dependent on the individual. So it's going to depend on so many different factors. When I'm thinking about brain health, I'm thinking about what is it that we can do to help people age as well as possible so that they're not just adding years to life, but adding life to years. That's what I think when I think of brain health.
Oh, that's fantastic. And Stephen, I think building upon Allison's observations, I guess implicit in asking what is brain health is the next part of that is what can we do about it? Is it something that all we can do is measure our brain health? Or are there things that, again, much like heart health or health in general, there are things that we can do to optimize and have healthier aging? And
it really is, and it's a ripple effect, right? It's not just about healthy aging. The earlier you start, the more benefit you're going to have. But it's really true. What can we do other than measure it, right? We're diagnosing stress and depression more than ever. What good is that? Just diagnosing it, right? That's not what we want to be, is proactive. And Dr. Jeff Ling from Johns Hopkins, former head of DARPA's Innovation Lab, says, what we're doing is getting left of boom, right? It's easy to say, I've got a problem once you have it, right? People don't think about their brain health left of boom. And we want to keep people as far left of boom as possible. And what we're learning is, it's really fascinating. I mean, Allison mentioned diet and all of these other things you can do. And think about it. Generally, if it's good for your heart, it's going to be pretty good for your brain. So let's start there. Let's get a little more sleep. Let's start there. But the other thing, the fascinating thing we learned, and we did randomized trials on this, is that just cognitive training, right? Teaching people how to intentfully think about their brain. Guess what? You can practice to become more innovative. You can practice to have better strategic attention. You can practice to have better problem-solving skills. And we now can measure that sort of complex thinking through our Brain Health Index. When you do all of that, your brain structure actually changes. And we've proven that with fMRI imaging. So we get better network connectivity. We get better more gray matter. We get better white matter integrity. All of that, think about your engine, your brain, that engine, that executive engine, it's just performing better. And guess what? When it performs better, it works better for a longer period of time. So it becomes self-fulfilling. Better brain health leads to better brain performance, which guess what? Leads to better brain health. It just self-feeds.
Wonderful. Allison, maybe you can help us from a research scientist perspective understand both the opportunities and the challenges here by discussing some of the biomarkers that, if to follow on what Steve is addressing, in order to understand what works, what doesn't work, what can we do, how do we measure progress, we need to have some biomarkers for brain health.
Yeah, this is the million-dollar question right now. What are the right kind of biomarkers? There certainly are different kinds of genetic markers that people can be looking at, but I think it's really important that people recognize that we are not driven just by our genes, right? We're driven by our environment, we're driven by our behavior as well. So we're often asked if there's a lot of Alzheimer's or other related dementias in my family, does that mean that I'm going to get it too? And the answer is not necessarily. It depends on exactly how you live and how lucky you are to some extent. And just, I saw that there was a question earlier in the Q&A about Alzheimer's and dementia. And just to be clear to everyone, Alzheimer's and dementia are not the same thing. Alzheimer's is a kind of dementia, and there are multiple kinds of dementia. The Alzheimer's is just the most common type of dementia. But the thinking used to be that if you had the gene, you were going to end up with a disease. But now we know that at least 40% of the risk factors can be modified by changing your lifestyle, right? And those are risk factors that include early childhood education. They include factors in the environment. They include, as Stephen had mentioned, factors like sleep and diet and stress. Loneliness actually is a huge risk factor for dementia. People who are lonely are 2 to 3 times more likely to end up with one form of dementia or another. And then as Stephen said, there's this link between the heart and the brain, you know, and it's not just that the heart knows what the heart wants and the brain thinks that it knows what it wants. It's that there's the blood flow is important for brain processing, right? And so things that you're doing that improve your heart health will improve your brain health as well. So if you have diabetes or other kinds of diseases that are going to affect your circulation in one way or another, those are risk factors that we need to be able to look at. So anything that's picking up any of those kinds of risk factors, your weight, all of these kinds of things, those are certain kinds of biomarkers. One of the sorts of things that we're looking at, trying to delve into a little bit earlier, is how can we, using really simple tools, figure out who's on the path toward dementia before they even start to see any symptoms of, say, memory decline. So in our lab, we're looking at really basic vision testing. So how well people can recognize faces or see contours that are embedded in clutter, those kinds of things. Another one of my colleagues is looking at, Jennifer Ryan is looking at how eye movement patterns are able to predict who's headed toward the path of dementia. Another colleague, Claude Elaine, is looking at other kinds of markers within EEG that are you know, certain sort of changes in the signal that your brain is giving in response to the integration of, say, sound and vision or sound and touch. So the multisensory integration. And you know, within the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, we've also funded a couple of companies, including ReadySpec, which is just looking at, is taking a picture of your eye in really high definition, and changes in the retina sometimes can predict who's headed toward Alzheimer's, for example. And then there's another great company called Darmian out of the Bay Area. Ultra, I think you might know them. And they're using MRI to be able to predict, what they try to do is predict like 10 to 15 years before there's any symptoms based on an MRI, who's at risk. So there's a whole different set of markers. What we're focusing on are markers that would be, and of course there's blood and things like that. We're trying to focus on markers that would be really easy for people to use on their phone. We can appify them and we can use them anywhere in the world. And they don't cost a lot of money. Like, that's my dream, is that we could have these markers that anyone can use, and they're reliable. And even if they're not necessarily the gold standard of saying you've got, you know, you're headed toward Alzheimer's, it alerts people that they need to be aware and go and see their doctor and then get a more fulsome workup. So that's what we're thinking of in terms of brain markers.
Fantastic. And I know there's some interesting systems that involve interaction with virtual environments, both using augmented reality and virtual reality to do a more sophisticated cognitive assessment. And you know, from my point of view, both if you can measure something and then also challenge something, you have a way to perturb the system. And if we are clever about how we provide the challenges, then we can also help people you know, exercise their brains and build new skills. Now, I should say to our audience that this is an area of evolution in research, and there has been in the past some, and this is something to be aware of, that some very exaggerated claims that some approaches and technologies can prevent or mitigate some of the more severe neurodegenerative diseases. As a reaction to some of those claims, there's also been some pushback from the research community saying, you know, we really don't know a lot about what works. And the reality is we are learning a lot about what works. And there are some pathways and some systems that we see great promise to, but it is an area that is evolving. And that's why it's so important to have systems that allow us to do the measurements as a starting point. And it's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be working with Muse, because we do have a very powerful way of getting not just the physiological signals, EEG and other signals, but also a way to intervene with mindfulness training and with better sleep feedback. So biomarkers are a fantastic way to start. Understanding what's going on is really important, and that's why I'm excited to have our two experts with us here today. But also, we're moving into a zone of providing systems that help support healthier brain aging, and that's so important. And maybe that's something that we should move into now. Stephen and Allison. And again, these are large issues that we could spend months talking about. We only have a short amount of time. Tell us, and audience also, please jump in. Tell us your perspective on, okay, we can measure things that give us some indication of where we're going and what to watch out for. What are you excited about in terms of potential interventions that can help us with cognitive aging issues?
Well, let me start there, Allison, because the way I look at healthy aging, and we had a group of young interns here, so all is not lost on the youth of America. The fact that they got it quickly actually told me something that, old dogs like me maybe weren't so ready to think about our brains and our brain health. So the first thing I would say is, I think there's a whole new audience that will be receptive to the message. Because I can tell you, when I found out my mom was an Alzheimer's patient, I took the view I didn't want to know. I would not have wanted to know if I was going to be a higher candidate for Alzheimer's, because I didn't think there was anything you could do about it. So I took a business approach, and that's what I'm doing here at the translational side here at Center for Brain Health, Walter, is thinking about, let's take away the mystery and the stigma of even talking about this, right? Because the more people embrace the idea, if I just do something about it, I can improve my brain health, right? So let's just be as basic as we can, as opposed to, I don't want to know because I know it's a fait accompli, right? There's nothing I can do about it. So the first thing I would say is, what gets measured gets managed. It's kind of like your weight and your blood pressure and your cholesterol. Those are easy to measure. So the beauty is, we're finding easier ways to assess, whether it's through Muse or these other devices, kind of, are you treating your brain well? Is your brain kind of operating on a nice level? Because guess what? The better you treat your brain and the better you have it operating efficiently, you're going to have ancillary benefits that probably push off Alzheimer's-like symptoms, right? That probably give you a better chance to fall outside of the probability chain, right? So it's not, none of it's a magic wand. It's, why wouldn't you create easy ways to improve your brain performance? And it's easier than losing weight. You don't have to go to the gym. You just have to kind of slightly change what you do. And guess
Absolutely.
what? Go ahead, Walter.
Well, I was going to say that you're absolutely right, Stephen. And I remember back when I was a teenager growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, that I saw someone jogging, and it stood out to me and to other people as, what is he running away from? Why is he doing that? It was so unusual because we didn't have this emphasis on personal health and wellness, and jogging had not yet become something that was just part of what we do to maintain our body health. And I think you're absolutely right, Stephen. A big part of this is raising our awareness that there are things that we should be aware of and not have a stigma associated with it, not be scared of it. And also support research groups like your group and Allison's groups and others that are working to address this. And it's something we really do need to take and get ahead of. There's we have worldwide an aging population, and the U.S. population has doubled since the 1960s, and yet family size has gone down, and we will not have the ability to support some of the challenges that occur with an aging population. We can just do the demographics and look at the math. We need to start moving on this aggressively now, or we're going to have a big problem further downstream.
Yeah, but if you can even just defer or delay the onset of, say, Alzheimer's by 5 years, you reduce the incidence of it by 50%. So we wouldn't see this growing, like exponential growth of the neurodegenerative diseases if we can find a way of even just delaying it. So if we can, anything that we can do, even if it's not preventing it altogether, just delaying it is going to be a huge impact. And to Stephen's point, I think I just did a session earlier in the day, which was more focused on sort of nutrition and exercise and those sorts of things, and how you can, make sure that you're staying as healthy as you can for your brain health. And it can get really overwhelming when we say, all you need to do is exercise right and eat right and sleep right and expose your brain to lots of things. And it's like, there's too much. So the main thing is just pick one thing and do baby steps within that to start. If you try to do everything all at once in terms of an intervention, it's just too overwhelming and people can't stick with it. So just like, you know, if you're on a diet or something and you try to cut out everything that you love, you're not going to be able to stick with it. It's too much all at once. And so, you know, the trick is to sort of do things in a way that don't disrupt your life too much, but are putting you in the right direction. So for example, I started drumming a few years ago, and I'd always loved, you know, music and drumming. And I know from research at the Rotman Research Institute and other places that people who are trained in music are not immune to dementia, but it's certainly protective of dementia. So people, if you're learning another language or you're learning an instrument, all of those kinds of things help in terms of as an intervention of sorts, in terms of at least delaying the onset of dementia. And the other thing with drumming is just that when you're drumming, depending on the kind of drumming, you know, whether it's, you know, smooth jazz or, you know, heavy metal or something, it can burn a lot of calories. It's a lot of exercise. And you're always trying to sort of learn new things. Your body's doing different, one arm's doing one thing, the other's doing another thing, one foot, when you're singing at the same time. So you're multitasking, you're trying to integrate new things, you're learning new patterns all the time. So it takes all of these different kinds of things that we know are good for your brain health. And for me, because I love it, it's something that I look forward to doing and I do it all the time. So that's really the advice, is pick something that you love and you know, try to sort of move into it slowly.
And Allison, we want to see the YouTube clips of your drumming, please. You know, I guess a question for our audience is, you know, I think Allison's point is spot on, that we need to, there's many things we can do. I'm curious what, you know, there's mindfulness, there's better sleep, nutrition, exercise, other things, and improving ways to perhaps measure where we are on our journey to do this. I'm curious to hear from our audience what they have found or are using as a way to help promote their, you know, their health and longevity, including brain health. And Allison, I also would be curious, you know, for me, sleep is a big issue. I think it's one of the things that we can measure, the quality of our sleep. And one of the technologies I think is particularly adept at that is the Muse technology. And one of the reasons I appreciate the company so much. But I'm curious, Stephen and Allison, what do you, well, Allison, you mentioned drumming. In terms of research, do you have a focus on, or are you very broad in your approach and understanding what can help and what can be a challenge?
In my own personal research?
Yeah, well, the research at your center.
At my center, yeah, the research at my center is focused on a range of different things. So it's, our group has shown, for example, volunteering can be beneficial, learning another language, learning music, all of those sorts of things. There's also quite a lot of work at our center on brain stimulation. And I don't mean just sort of reading a book to stimulate your brain. I mean like zapping the brain with either transcranial alternating current.
Reading books helps. It does.
Reading books does help. I mean, there's the nun studies, which people may know about, right? Where the nuns that read more books ended up having better brain health for longer. So people are doing those sort of more invasive, if you will, sorts of studies. There's also a lot of work on 40 hertz stimulation. So stimulation at a certain rate, whether it's lights or sounds or music. In fact, if you Google 40 hertz, the first paper that comes up is a paper from our research institute by Bernhard Ross on this topic about sound pulses at 40 hertz that can improve people's memory, for example. And then we're looking at the interactions across all of those things. So we have a new center that's starting within the Rotman Research Institute and at Baycrest Health Sciences, which is called the Kimmel Family Center for Brain Health and Wellness, which is looking at how all of these different factors interact. Because to date, a lot of the work has been done in isolation. So people look at what's the impact of nutrition by itself, what's the impact of exercise by itself, what's the impact of cognitive training or learning or reading or whatever by itself. And what we want to know is how do all of those different factors interact, and how do they interact with people's biology? How does it interact with the brain gut interaction, with your genes, with the environment in which you live, and what can we do to figure out what's the personal longevity prescription, if you will, for each individual that's going to help them optimize their brain health. Because when you were asking before, people were saying, well, what's the best thing to do? It depends on who you are. But one thing we do know is that the best thing to do is not to do the same thing over and over and over, because the brain is a novelty seeking device. It gets bored very easily. The neurons actually will stop firing if you keep showing it the same thing over and over. So you have to mix it up. Just like at the gym, you don't do the same exercise over and over. You want to have variety. Variety is the spice of life, and it's the spice of your brain too.
Fantastic. And Stephen, I'd love to hear the variety of things that your Center on Brain Health is exploring.
What's interesting is we're taking a more expansive view because we're going to leverage machine learning, because we're going to collect as many data points as possible and let the strength of volume of data instruct us. So we're not looking at hundreds of participants. We're not looking at thousands. We're looking at hundreds of thousands. So think of the tens, hundreds of millions of data points we're collecting from that group. And it was fascinating, Walter. You asked a great question. So when you think about whether it's all the things you can measure through blood samples, through lifestyle, typical psychometric measures, we're working with Dr. David Larry, who is working on an environmental observatory. So think about, by zip code, having an overarching way to look at data about what's going on in the environment, where people work, what their general health profile is. Now that we have a brain health index we can measure, which also measures complex brain measures, when you start mapping all that together, a human can't really tell you what that means. But we already have a machine learning engine working in the background to start parsing these millions of data points to tell us what we can't possibly as a human being figure out. So that's what we're most excited about, Walter, is being the platform of choice that other researchers like Allison and others will want to take advantage of and start telling us some things about our data that we don't know, right? So, we have our own group to look at it, but we want others to leverage that same data.
Oh, fantastic. And, it may be, it's so good that you're setting up a platform to collect such a wide variety of information. It might be that background, people who live in noisy environments, or people who go to noisy restaurants more often than other people, combined with some other factor, maybe make a big difference compared to something else. And you're right, it's something that, unless we have a lot of information, this can be very difficult to tease apart. And Allison, maybe that's an opportunity for you to describe some of your thinking about ways to involve people who are perhaps wearing EEG headbands to contribute their data to help in a citizen science way move research forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Stephen more that where science in general is headed is this big data approach, and part of that, COVID. I saw that there were some questions about COVID in the brain, and we can maybe move to that later in the Q&A. Yes. But one of the things that COVID did that is maybe a positive byproduct for science is it got more people online, and it also sped up the process of scientists doing online studies. So like my last grant that I had submitted before COVID was all about doing things with the citizenry around the world to collect masses of data along the lines that Stephen's talking about, and not just behavioral data or data about the environment, but brain data as well. When I submitted it, I got funded well, but one of the comments was, well, it's always better to do things in person. And now everyone's doing everything online, right? And people are realizing that they can play a role. The problem has been that the traditional kind of brain scans that we do for research are really labor intensive and require expertise and highly technical equipment. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is trying to see whether we can connect people who already, for example, have a Muse to any kind of experiment, a psychological experiment, a vision study on how do you recognize a face, And so we're trying to make it so that it's as easy as possible for anyone in the world, both to create studies that they can make use of all of the users who are out there to start to collect the brain data to advanced research in a big way, as Stephen said, not just sort of 10 people at a time, but really millions of people is what we're thinking, and anywhere in the world. I mean, we've got people from all over the world here. In fact, I saw somebody from South Africa, and that's really it was a trip to South Africa that inspired me a few years ago to be thinking about this, because my friends at the University of Pretoria, their entire departmental budget is $20,000 a year for psychology. Well, one EEG system, like the one that I have, is $250,000. So if you could now shrink things down so it's $200 for an EEG system and you can distribute them everywhere in the world, now anybody can do neuroscience, right? And then it brings all of those data into the kind of platform that Stephen's talking about, so you can add in the brain data and not just these other kinds of, more, census-driven data or other kinds of traditional data. I think that's going to be I was going to say a brain changer. I meant a game changer, but it is also a brain changer. So I'm really, it's about democratizing science and helping everybody who's out there, help everyone out there, help the scientists help themselves, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, and so exciting. And from my end, a lot of my work is focused on using simulations, virtual reality, and augmented reality technology as a way to challenge our brains, and also a way to do better assessments in a more ecologically representative way that represents behavior as opposed to a paper and pencil test. And there's been some really interesting work of correlating neuroimaging technology with the type of results we can get from a challenge using an inexpensive system. And to me, the integration of sensing technology with challenging technology to come up with ways both to exercise, to evaluate, and to inspire is going to be so exciting. So I think we're about to embark on a very exciting pathway of having a whole new generation of sensing technologies integrated with very sophisticated ways of examining, as Stephen described, through deep learning, machine learning, the patterns, and coming up with better predictive modeling for an individual. Right now, clinical care and science tends to have a one-size-fits-all model, but we need to be very diverse, we need to find ways to reach underserved populations, and we need to be, if we're going to address these big challenges, we need to leverage all the tools we have. But the good news is, I think there's some very powerful tools that are emerging. Well, I wanted to reserve some time for us to respond to. I could talk with both of you for decades, and I hope I do. But I did want to reserve some time to address some of the observations and questions that we've received from our audience. So, Adam, I wonder if you could help us bring to the surface some of the questions so that we can address them.
Absolutely. Let's get into it. How granular does your research into brain health and aging go? I'm specifically asking from the viewpoint of female menopause. I know, for instance, that women struggle disproportionately with sleep once they enter that phase of their lives, which certainly must have an impact. So I guess, did you guys have any thoughts about that one?
Yes,
Well,
Stephen, you want to start?
I'm not a woman. Yeah, I'll start out, but Allison's definitely gonna. But the beauty is with our research is we can identify with this larger populations that we're going to have as part of our research, and we've already signed up, Walter, just this year 6,500 new participants in the project, and most are female. So unlike a lot of research, you're right. I think the female audience and the issues that are peculiar to women have been ignored in research. We're seeing a tide shift there, and interestingly, women seem more willing to talk about their brain health. So we have a nice population set of women in our study, and frankly, they're easier to recruit for us now. So we're looking at a lot of, again, some of those other markers, but we have a really nice, diverse, both in age and gender in our population. But Allison, I'll leave it to you on any specific science that goes to those particular questions.
Sure. The only thing I would add is just that people may know that there are many more women who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's than men. It's about 2/3 are women. And for a long time, people thought it was just because women tend to live longer, but it's not just that. It's clearly more than just that. And there do seem to be differences in terms of hormonal issues and so on and so forth. One of our scientists, Jillian Einstein, she's got a great name, that's her area of specialization. She focuses on women's brain health. In fact, she's the CIHR chair in Canada, the Poslin chair in women's brain health. So that's the area that she's working in. So it's clear that, as Stephen said, there's quite a lot more work to be done, but there definitely are some special issues for women. And we're starting to see, certainly in Canada, a much, much bigger emphasis on trying to understand sex and gender interactions in aging and in all other aspects of research. And with respect to sleep in particular, which was part of the question, absolutely, sleep is incredibly important for brain health, and for a whole bunch of different reasons. So there actually was a study recently that suggested that people, if you don't have at least 6 hours of real decent sleep per night, you're at a much, much higher risk for cognitive decline as you get older. And
you're probably worrying some of us with that, Allison.
I don't get that much. I know it's a problem for me. It's like, do as I say, not as I do. But that's where, I mean, Walter, you mentioned Muse, and I know this isn't meant to be like a commercial for Muse or anything, but I suffer from insomnia. I have my whole life, and probably, menopause doesn't help that very much. But Muse, for me, my problem is my mind is just like flying all over the place. And so it does help me quiet my mind. And what I love about it is that different people have different reasons that they can't sleep well. And the sleep section of Muse has these different kinds of, for some, I know, like Ariel Garten, for her, she likes to go off and visualize things. Whereas for me, I like to sort of do the body versions. And for different people, it's really personalized. And so you can figure out what works for you. And also just being able to track it, I think, and have a consistent strategy for how to approach sleep is really just so important. But it also interacts with all these other factors, diet and so on and so forth. But it's definitely something that is increasingly being looked at, both sleep and the sex and gender.
Okay. Adam, perhaps some of the other questions that have been upvoted that the audience would like us to address?
Absolutely. And one that Allison had mentioned prior, are there any scientific insights on COVID-19 and the brain and the possible impacts on aging of this?
Maybe I can start, and then Stephen, you can follow up it, and just to scare Walter even more. We've actually been doing some studies since March 2020, looking at the direct impact of COVID on the brain in a study we call NeuroCovid, where we're doing MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, as well as actually using Muse, because we can then travel around with it to be able to measure the effect of COVID on your brain signals. And we're also doing a whole bunch of other things, mental health and cognitive sensory testing, all of it's a whole different range of different things that are going on. And it clearly is having an impact, a direct impact on the brain, and an extended impact. So even in people who didn't end up in hospital, who had symptoms and were recovering at home, we see at least 4 months out changes in the pattern of brain activation, and sometimes even things like lesions and inflammation in the brain. So one of the things that we're doing right now is trying to look at what's the relationship between whether people had those kind of changes in their brain structure and function with the long haulers, these people who months and months and months out have all kinds of other cognitive symptoms. And then from an indirect perspective, it's going to have an effect as well, because all of the things that we've been talking about that help you prevent cognitive decline have been harder because of the social isolation that's been really critical to keep us all safe from getting the direct impact. So, there's a whole bunch of other work going on in my institute and others across Canada, around the world, looking at those indirect impacts. So I think we're just starting to see that picture evolve. But if you haven't had your vaccine, I would just urge you get it, because you don't want it. It's much better to get the vaccine in general than it is to get COVID. I'll put it that way.
And I would just add, this goes to the left of boom discussion, because this isn't the first big health crisis we're going to face, in the next decade. This really shined a light on the problem that existed, is that we have not built resilient brains, and we've overtaxed the brain so that when something like this happens, your already fragile brain is being attacked by these additional stressors. So through neuroplasticity in our research, we've proven that your brain can actually be more resilient to concussion, to the fog effects of chemo brain. We believe we're working with the Nova Health System on evaluating the direct impact on the fog that comes from COVID brain, whatever that is. And that could be from actually having contracted COVID, or to Allison's point, just being subjected to all of the other isolation and stress elements that went along with it. So you can, just like you can actually train your brain to be less reactive, so you're less of an emotional responder. People think that's hardwired. It's actually not. Neuroplasticity proves you can actually train your brain to be more patient. You can train your brain to be more resilient. And then the fMRI data proves that. So that's one of the most exciting things. Is this tells me we just need to be more resilient, and we can train our brains to be more resilient. And that's technically, that's not unicorn. That's actually scientifically proven.
Well, and I think, it's been such a challenging time for so many of us. And yet I'm hoping that we are more aware of the importance of how interconnected we are, and how health is so important. And Stephen, to your point, having some resilience so that we can deal not with just with the big worldwide issues, but the perpetrations of our daily lives. There's life has challenges, and if we can leverage some of the learnings from your group and Allison's group and so many of the other groups that are working so hard to address these issues and build pathways to understand ourselves better and to build resilience, we'll enjoy life a lot more, as well as being better prepared for some of the challenges. Well, unfortunately, I think we're getting close to the top of the hour and our time to stop. I wanted to thank our audience for joining us and sending through some of your thoughts and perspectives. We're going to be setting up a discussion group within the Muse community to address some of these questions that we didn't have time to get to now. And I think there's going to be an email coming out to the people registered with some of the details and information about the recording. And I think they're even going to offer some special discounts for the people who joined us today. So if you're interested, you can get access to some of the both assessments and interventions that the Muse group provides. I also want to do a really big thank you to Allison and Stephen and your organizations. The work you're doing is so vital, and we really appreciate all the hard work that you're putting in. I hope you're not working too hard, that you're getting enough sleep and you're exercising too, but we're very grateful for you for sharing your expertise and your insights, and we've learned a good deal from you. And I think we probably have another minute or two, but I wanted to get the summary in first, so that we didn't run out of time for that. Allison and Stephen, what are your closing thoughts?
I would just like to say I'm so encouraged that brain health is something we can talk about without people kind of ducking for cover, right? I was in front of the San Antonio Spurs. They started a mental health awareness function 2 years ago, and of course last year's got forestalled because of COVID. But I'm surrounded by these neuroscientists and psychologists, but it's just nice to be able to talk about it as something proactive you can address without having to raise your hand and say, I'm broken or I have a problem. No, we all have the same problem. I no longer have on resume that I'm a great multitasker, because I know that's a myth and toxic to your brain health. So by small changes, and Allison said it earlier, small changes. We talk about 5-minute brain breaks a day can change your life. There's simple steps you can take to improve your brain health. As long as we keep it top of mind, pun intended, we can all benefit from it.
Yeah, I would just echo everything that Stephen has said, and I also think it was said early on. It's never too late, and it's also never too early to start thinking about your brain health. And so I would just urge everyone to my grandmother always used to say, you're never too young to start using face cream, which sounds odd, but once I was 50, I was like, oh, I should have listened to her, right? And same thing I'm saying now, it's never too young to start thinking about your brain health and taking actions to make sure that you're doing the most with your life. And there's just very simple ways that you can do it in ways that you're enjoying life as well. And the other thing I just would say is COVID also, one of the things it's done, especially for people who are working at home, it's blurred the lines a little bit between work and life, so that many people are kind of working all the time. And it's just so important to step back and take a breath, whether you're meditating or not, but just sort of do whatever it is that relaxes you, that will reduce your stress. That's one of the most important things you can do to find balance in your life. And I think that we'll all do a lot better. Certainly I do better if I'm not just working all the time, but if I mix things up. And I would just leave everyone with that reminder that the brain is a novelty-seeking device. And so the more you can try different kinds of things, the more enjoyment you'll get from life, and the more your brain will thank you later.
And let me just add, I saw several questions come in about what's a brain break, right? And it shouldn't be a great mystery. 5 times 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, 5 times a day, just do nothing. Take a little downtime, turn the radio off in the car, sit outside before you run into the next meeting, do a little breathing exercise, take a walk around your building. Don't get on your phone, don't answer emails and texts, just do nothing. Mindfulness is a great way to think about singular focus and losing that, kind of crazy overtaxed brain, but it really is emptying your brain, giving that brain battery a recharge. So these steps are simple. Please feel free to sign up for the Brain Health Project on brainhealthproject.org. It's free and you can do it remotely. And to Allison's point, this is about you, but better. Wherever you start, you can be better, and it's easy to do.
Well, again, thank you, Stephen and Allison, for your hard work and the work of your colleagues at the centers. And thank you, audience, for taking the time to give us your comments and to join us here. And let's reconvene at a later point and see how we're all doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.